side, they say, look, we are in an age where you need to push.
But that's a bit unfair, Rajdeep, because he puts in that much energy and effort into everything he does.
No,
it's
look,
just,
I'm
it's
telling
just the
you
kind
two
of person
sides.
he is, right?
You will see the opposition has consistently targeted him, saying Prime Minister Modi is an event manager and his governance fails and event management takes over. His supporters say, look, it's an intrinsic part of his overall focus on any project that he takes up. I mean, he takes up projects in what is called mission mode. So G20 has been mission mode over the last 1 year.
Is mission mode.
So in the last 11 months, he's made sure that the eye for detail on G20 is taken to another level, scaled up. The other word which is often used with those close to Prime Minister Modi is scale. You know, you do everything on scale. So you've got an Amitabh Kant who was involved with the God's Own Country campaign in Kerala as a bureaucrat from Kerala, Incredible India as tourism secretary. So for him to be the Sherpa, he's also someone who plays a lot of attention to, you know, the packaging. G20 has been wonderfully packaged.
This is much more than just the packaging.
No, but I'm saying that's an important element.
But it needs to be the whole package, right? It can't just be one. You have to ensure that A, you have a narrative, B, you're able to project the narrative, and C, that you're able to get things done. It's all of it together. Just one of those three without the other two don't really serve any purpose.
I think the strength clearly is the packaging. The other elements, whether they fall in place, can be debated. But there is no doubt that if you purely looked at packaging, I don't think any G20 summit over the years has been packaged as effectively as what India has done. And that's huge, because it's not, usually G20 summits are at best, you know, a couple of events that you hold before the big summit. India's done 200, I repeat, 200 events across 60 cities.
It's much more than event
incredible.
management. I don't want to get into a squabble with Rajdeep early in the morning. We're expecting guests to start arriving in just a moment. I'm getting a very strong conclave valley feeling, Shiv, because it's like all our anchors, editors show up early in the morning at the conclave venue. They're checking everything out before the guests start coming in. Prime Minister Modi doing a bit of a conclave tour of the Bharat Mandapam this morning. But we just received word that there will be a biofuel alliance, which will be announced at 5 p.m. That's the story we're getting this morning, where several countries are signing up to be a part of the biofuel alliance. That's the story that's breaking at this moment. We'll take you through the details. We've got Geeta Mohan with us. Paulami Saha joins us on this as well. That's the story that's breaking at this moment, this biofuel alliance, which will have 19 countries, 12 international organizations who are agreeing to join, 6 of them G20 countries, Brazil, US, South Africa, Canada, Argentina and Italy. Geeta Mohan has more details for us. Geeta, explain the significance of this biofuel alliance that India is pushing.
Well, it is a very important alliance, so to say, because the push from India, Rahul, is to transition from fossil fuel dependence to biofuel to green energy. And in that, India is indeed taking a lead. There is going to be a major conversation on that front, but also the United States of America, the G20 member states, whether if it is the 19 member states or the European Union, all of them very focused on how to shift and transition from fossil fuel to biofuel. And in that, now a confirmation coming in from none other than the schedule that has been put out by the President of the United States of America's office, that there indeed is going to be a biofuel alliance meeting that is to take place today. The timing of it, again, I'll have to check on when that alliance meeting is going to take place.
It will happen at 5 p.m.
This is again to take 5 p.m. right. So this is again to take forward the conversation on climate change. There are 2 parallel conversations, Rahul, that are taking place. One is the first session of the G20 summit, which is One Earth, where the major conversation will be on climate change and how to bring about a consensus in tackling climate change, also looking at developed and developing nations and taking into account accommodating the concerns of the developing nations. And now we are also looking at another meeting that will be taking place. That's the Biofuel Alliance, and that certainly is going to be a significant one that will take place around 5 p.m. after the conversation is already had on climate change issues in the first session of the G20 summit.
Biofuel is a liquid fuel produced from renewable sources, so vegetable oils, animal fats, a cleaner burning replacement shift. When countries like India and Brazil started pushing biofuels, a lot of people thought this is some loony idea.
Yeah.
Now, with this alliance and the kind of technological developments that we've seen, and we know that Nitin Gadkari, the transport minister, is one of the biggest advocates of biofuel, shows that it's becoming more and more central to what people think can be a clean energy transition.
And what is clear for the world to see also, Rahul, including with the announcement of this global, biofuel alliance, is that India is sticking to its guns in the face of a huge amount of very powerful opposition from the petro bloc, from other, interest groups. India has basically said this is something we do not want to budge on. You mentioned Minister Gadkari. Recently in the headlines there was an ethanol-fueled car. Biofuels, in terms of research, in terms of how India wants to not just be a part of an alliance, but seen to be a leader in sort of setting a standard, setting benchmarks as far as emissions targets are concerned, is something that India has decided not to budge on, especially at a time when countries like China have seemed to be retracting from their own commitments as far as emissions are concerned. And that's the reason why this is more than just a simple announcement. This alliance has a long way to go.
Gaurav Sawant, can you take our viewers through what to expect starting 9:20 when the G20 leaders start arriving one by one? Just give our viewers a sense of what the sequence of events is going to be like.
So 9:20 onwards, all the heads of state, government, organizations that have been invited, the special invitee countries, one by one, they start coming in. We're told it's in alphabetical order. Once they start coming in, there's a picture with Prime Minister Narendra Modi with all the flags in the backdrop. Once that picture is taken, they all then go to the leaders' lounge, and then they assemble for the first plenary, the first meeting that between 10 a.m. to 13:30, 1:30 p.m. When they break off for lunch or when they break off for one-on-ones, bilaterals and pull-asides. Now, there are multiple rooms in this Bharat Mandapam right behind me, where now you see the Prime Minister's car and all the other cars already positioned. This is when 9:20 a.m. onwards, all the guests start coming in. Rahul, if I may, a point of whether this is very effective packaging, a very good package with content not being good will not sell, and the fact that the world is buying what India is saying is an indicator that the contents are also good. Whether it's showcasing our civilization or talking about bringing African Union into G20, that's a huge step that's being taken, or talk about meeting all our climate goals. And of course, talking about India's technological might. Again, UPI is one success story that's being looked at by the world. Multiple countries want to look at it. So it's great packaging, but inside the great packaging also comes a great product endorsed not by people within the country, but also overseas, Rahul. They will not put their money if it's not worth it.
I think the Global Biofuel Alliance also needs to be seen in the context of, when we look at achievements of this government, the Prime Minister has been an evangelist when it comes to the Solar Alliance as well. If you've seen Prime Minister Modi, and this stretches back to his days as Gujarat Chief Minister. So he's been a forerunner. I remember a meeting that he held, he released a book of APJ Abdul Kalam, which Mr. Kalam and the then Chief Minister of Gujarat released on climate change, and we are talking about 2009. So one of the issues on which the Prime Minister has been a great champion has been renewable climate change. At a time when very few Indian leaders in the early 2000s were talking about it, the Prime Minister was there talking about climate change and the Solar Alliance in Gujarat, and he's now just scaled it up. And that's interesting because that's not often an issue.
So that's not just packaging.
Look, as I said, the packaging is critical. In my view, on the content you can debate. Look, on the content you can have alternate viewpoints. That's my view. that you can question whether we made enough progress, whether G20 will give us the kind of rewards that we want to put our place on the global high table. We don't know that.
We don't know that yet.
That's my point. On content, I think the jury is out. On packaging, no one can deny that Mr. Modi has taken packaging of an event of this state to another level. As I said, I don't think I've seen any other country put that kind of effort into the packaging.
At the B20, which happened in the capital a couple of weeks ago, I was speaking to a few of the delegates and corporates from Brazil, which will be the next country which will host the G20, and they were saying that India has taken the G20, the B20, all of them, the Startup 20, the Youth 20, to such a high level that it will be very difficult, they felt, for their government to be able to cope and to compete, because at the end of it, there is an element of competition. I mean, what came out of Italy, what came out of Hangzhou, what came out of Osaka, what came out of Delhi, there is an element of international competition there.
Absolutely.
And it's good to win that competition.
No, look, as I said, if you had an event purely for packaging, India would be on the top of the podium. I don't think any other country, I reiterate, I don't think any other country has invested as much into a G20 summit as India has. Once again, 200 events in 60 days.
This is at a very pivotal moment in global affairs where India's stature as a nation is also rising from a middle power that India has been for the last several decades to an emerging economic powerhouse. That's a massive change to go from 10 to 3 in the next few years. This is a once in a lifetime shift in global power equations. So there's something much bigger at play. You need to make the extra effort, which may at some level seem a little over the top, but you need to make that extra effort so that your country can rise and take its place in the world.
I agree with you with one little caveat that I think this will be decided in the next 10 years. This is work in progress. We are at a potential sweet spot where we will be growing as an economy at a time when several other countries have either plateaued or are struggling. China has a huge challenge. I mean, it's a much bigger economy, than what we are, but it is at a sort of critical point in the evolution of China's economy. They're facing huge challenges at home. On the other hand, India possibly, you've had a strong, stable government now for almost 10 years. You've got an economy which potentially can grow at 5, 6, 7% over the next 10 years and thereby becomes the third largest economy in the world.
I had the opportunity.
But you see, in all of this, the caveat is that while we look at the glass as half full, remember we are in a new world order which is multipolar where new challenges will come. No one knew 2020, 21 COVID would happen, then 22 you're suddenly sort of hit by Ukraine. You see, the world is changing faster than we imagine. Will we be able to keep up with the changing world? The hope is we can. But as I said, I think the jury is still out.
Each crisis is also an opportunity. India emerged stronger on the back of the COVID pandemic. China, because of the decisions they took on zero COVID, lockdowns and many other decisions, has emerged more wobbly. They're, of course, a 5 times bigger economy than India is. I had the opportunity to ask the Prime Minister this question when we met him for that G20 interview, and he said that there is nothing inevitable, Rajdeep. The fact that every challenge has to be dealt with and navigated.
Also Ukraine, where India's foreign policy has been completely
people
vindicated.
That India would be isolated because of the position. India stuck to its guns.
Absolutely.
And maneuvered its way through these choppy international waters very sensibly to now have a situation where the world doesn't necessarily readily embrace India's position, but they accept that India has a point of view. So that's a very big achievement, Rajdeep. All of this doesn't happen if there's just packaging. There has to be substance. Okay, we're getting images of Mohammed bin Salman from Saudi Arabia. He's just arrived, the Crown Prince, MBS, born the 31st of August 1985. King Salman in June 2017 appointed his son Mohammed bin Salman as heir. He's a polarizing figure internationally, seen by some as being a villain in the Khashoggi episode, but also seen by people inside his country as a reformer. Amongst the young, I had many batchmates from Saudi Arabia. They see him as a reformer, as an evangelist. He's being able to deal with the clergy and yet introduce a new Saudi Arabia which has space for women, more freedoms, more liberty than in the past. He has been granted the status of a state visit on the 11th of September, the day after the G20 gets over, Mohammed bin Salman will have a state visit. He's had a state visit in 2019. Before this, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been Ashwini Vaishnav there to receive him, the Indian Minister for Telecom. Also interestingly, most of the other dignitaries have been received by a Minister of State, signifying that this is one step higher. Even for Joe Biden, the American president, you had General V.K. Singh, who's Minister of State in the government, receive Joe Biden. Here you've got Ashwini Vaishnav, one of the most important ministers in the Modi government, who've gone to receive Mohammed bin Salman. He was originally slotted to come in yesterday. He's come in a day after that, but he's also staying on for an extra day. That's Mohammed bin Salman now stepping down in India. Shiv.
Absolutely. It's very important. This is a state visit by the leader of Saudi Arabia. There's going to be the separate meetings that happen between the Prime Minister and Mohammed bin Salman. We've seen a lot of camaraderie and bonhomie in the body language between these two leaders as well, quite separately from the G20 transformational relationship under the Modi government between India and Saudi Arabia. It's been taken to the next level as well. Like you said, Rahul, a polarizing figure, so I'm sure we're going to see quite a few things said here in the Indian press, and rightfully so, about the Saudi Arabian leader. But it's going to be interesting to see how this all fits in with India's West Asian policy as well. So many things have happened as far as UAE is concerned, as far as Iran is concerned, Saudi Arabia as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all fits in, with such a busy weekend already with the G20, Rahul.
Saudi Arabia, I think, is again an interesting element of the Modi foreign policy outreach. Because when Mr. Modi came to power, there were questions raised by, again, his critics. How would he deal with the Islamic world? And the truth of the matter, he's dealt with it extremely nimbly and extremely in an effective manner, to the point where your relationships, you mentioned Shiv, UAE, but with Saudi Arabia itself, you've got actually Russia, China, Saudi Arabia and India, ironically as part of one alliance within G20, opposing a proposal by Western countries to triple renewable energy capacity by 2030. And you've got India working closely with the Saudis, whether it is on issues that concern defense cooperation and indeed, oil exploration. So you've got
this is
India
one of the biggest
building new
foreign policy achievements of the Modi government. Again, to counter your point about just being packaging, this is much more than packaging. Saudi Arabia and countries in the UAE were big supporters of Pakistan in international bodies like the OIC. And Prime Minister Modi has been able to wean Saudi Arabia and the UAE away from Pakistan's embrace. That's a mess. I mean, look at his strong right-wing Hindutva credentials. Look at the kind of politics that Saudi Arabia and some of these Gulf countries have had to be able to take them away from Pakistan's embrace.
We have extradition agreements with them now.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think, in fact,
that's much more than packaging.
No, 1 minute. You see, we look at strengths. For example, the government's policies in the neighborhood can be questioned. How you've dealt with China, I think Mr. Modi's had setbacks despite his attempts to reach out to China.
No, but those setbacks are because of China, not because of Prime Minister Modi is doing.
At the end of the day, that we can debate. Whether he went and met Nawaz Sharif impromptu, didn't work out, reached out
but
to...
Bangladesh has been given a seat at the high table. Sheikh Hasina is here.
Bangladesh and India have had a strong relationship pre-2014. India's foreign policy...
No, there were so many problems with the border which
there was a very effective relationship between the two countries pre-2014 as well. I think the point I'm trying to make, Prime Minister Modi has surprised many people by his effective handling,
Gaurav has his hand up. He's
1 minute.
Wanting to come in and
of his
respond.
reach out to West Asia. I think one of his achievements, when you will list out a Prime Minister's achievements, one of the big achievements, I think, on the foreign policy front will be how we've effectively reached out to the Islamic world, how we've, in a way, isolated Pakistan, as you rightly said, on Kashmir within the OIC. I think that's a huge achievement. We can also question whether we've got our China policy right or wrong. And I think questioning one while praising another is the way we should be.
Okay, I think if we don't go to Gaurav, he'll just jump out of the screen and come straight into the media plex. So Gaurav, here you go.
Okay, Rahul, Saudi Arabia, one of India's biggest success stories started 2015. Effectively engaged Saudi Arabia. We have civilizational ties with Saudi Arabia. That has been harnessed. It's not just, the fuel that we get from there. It's not just the 175,000 Hajis who go every year. It's also the Indian diaspora that works in Saudi Arabia. That relationship has worked. It's a security alliance. It's a comprehensive security alliance that's worked very effectively. The fact that Ashwini Vaishnav went and received him is because this is a state visit that starts off immediately after this G20 visit, which is a multilateral visit. So all multilateral guests have been received by ministers of state. For a state visit, it's a cabinet minister who's gone and received Saudi Arabia. As far as China is concerned, India's policy is no longer subservient to China and no longer Chinese interests first, no longer permitting Chinese salami slicing. After Doklam and then after Galwan, India effectively said enough is enough, even if it means putting 50,000 troops at the line of actual control. No longer will Chinese salami slicing be permitted, and that was the rudest shock for Xi Jinping. Despite India reaching out to him, he tried more salami slicing and it hasn't worked out. That is why China's on the defensive today. That's point 3. Point 4, our relationship with Bangladesh has been good, but not when Khalida Zia was the Prime Minister of Bangladesh. When Khalida Zia was Prime Minister of Bangladesh, you had all the Pakistan ISI bases there effectively countering us. We almost had a two-front war that side when Khalida Zia was there. Therefore, Sheikh Hasina and India's engagement with Sheikh Hasina has worked out to India's advantage. And right now, you have a power plant that is being inaugurated. You have a rail line being inaugurated. India's engagement with Bangladesh is now being taken.
Yeah, but these building blocks, you see, Gaurav, you've got to recognize India's engagement with Sheikh Hasina has been actually pre-2014. A number of the initiatives that were taken, it's almost as if you're suggesting Prime Minister Manmohan Singh did nothing when he was in power, which I think is a very unfair way to look at India's foreign policy.
That at all.
So therefore, to suggest Khalida Zia was last Prime Minister of Pakistan of Bangladesh almost 2 decades ago now. Okay. So we've got to look at changes that have taken place. And similarly on China, Gaurav Sawant must recognize, while you say India's taken a tough stand, the fact is India did reach out to China in the early years, and it didn't work out.
Who comes out of it? The problem is they haven't given us a sequence, so we don't know who's coming first.
Apparently, in alphabetical order, Gaurav said alphabetical order.
Is that how they come?
That's what Gaurav said. Gaurav, alphabetical order, they've just started arriving, it looks like.
So it was... So guests have all started arriving. We can see behind us at that Bharat Mandapam where guests are arriving, but the distance at which we are for this vantage point, we only get to know which are the leaders that have arrived. If Mohammed bin Salman, since it's a state visit, perhaps is that the reason that he has come in first?
No, so Mohammed bin Salman just landed at the airport, Gaurav. He just landed at the airport. So he's not at the Bharat Mandapam yet. He just landed at the airport. And remember, you've got the heads of state and heads of government, and you've got the heads of all the international bodies as well. So now we're going to try and take you through who's coming as they come in. But we can see one by one, the guests have started arriving. All these tour car company guys are doing great business. They've got all their Maybachs fully booked out. So it's great business for them.
So how does it work out? Do all the leaders now, over the next 3 hours, are they closeted in one room together? The bilateral start post 1:30?
Oh yes, it's that same room where we were, that oval-shaped massive desk where all of them sit around one by one.
It's called One Family. The first meeting is called One Family.
And that's the one chaired by the Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister as the leader of the G20, India as the leader of the G20, the Prime Minister chairs a meeting of these 20 countries, am I correct? That they all are in one room, represented either by their foreign ministers, their prime ministers in some instance?
That's right. And I also want to just tell our viewers, Rajdeep, you're right, it's going to be in one room. That's Masatsugu Asakawa. He's the chief of the Asian Development Bank, you see there, walking in. He's the first to arrive there, past the flags. So I think, Rahul, the first people to arrive are the chiefs of the multilateral organizations. You'll have
Ajay Banga coming in
walking in as well, and then I think the government leaders will be
Georgieva, she now famous across the country for her Sambali steps. I mean, she's obviously a fantastic economist and very renowned macroeconomist, but that apart, she also, when she'd come into India, joined the cultural extravaganza. So we'll see. And we know that the American president, they've just put out a statement saying that Joe Biden will be coming at 10:30. So that happens sometime from now. So that's the first guest being received by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. A stunning setting. Usually I saw in Indonesia, they just had flags. Here you got that chakra, so it's a very nice backdrop. So as Rajdeep was saying, the packaging is strong.
Perfect.
The packaging should be
Perfect.
strong. Why
Wonderful.
not?
No, it should be. Let me say, I don't say it as a criticism. I say that actually, I keep reiterating, India has done what no other country's done when it comes to the packaging of a G20 event. Just trying to understand, multilateral organizations sit in on the meeting today. All the multilateral organizations that are there will be sitting in as invitees, as...
Correct. I've just got some information from the Prime Minister's office about the Konark wheel from Orissa. This was built in the 13th century during the reign of King Narasimha Dev I. The wheel with 24 spokes, also adapted into India's national flag, embodies India's ancient wisdom, civilization, architectural excellence. The rotating motion of the Konark wheel symbolizes time, the Kal Chakra, as well as progress and continuous change.
Fosum Hongbu, ILO के महानिदेशक.
This is the International Labour Organization chief.
Gilbert Fosum Hongbu, Director General, ILO.
The Director General of the International Labour Organization just coming in. That's Kristalina Georgieva, the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund. She, the one who won the internet with her moves, sprightly, bright economist, and also, someone who's steered the International Monetary Fund at a time when debt relief has become a major issue. Countries like Ethiopia, Zambia, Ghana working towards that.
And the IMF has been full of praise for India. If you look at their recent reports, they've been very upbeat on India. Both the IMF and the World Bank, but particularly the IMF, has been extremely bullish on the India story.
That's Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations. He did a press conference in the capital yesterday. He's having to steer the United Nations at a time when questions are being asked about the relevance, the role of the UN in being able to bring countries with differing points of view together. He spoke of the need to reform the United Nations Security Council in the press conference yesterday.
Secretary General of United Nations, माननीय एंटोनियो गुटेरेस, संयुक्त राष्ट्र संघ के सेक्रेटरी जनरल.
From Portugal, a country with which India again has had a long history, tumultuous in many ways, but a country with which, as we've known...
The next guest is Ajay Banga, big favorite in India. Both Mr. Banga and his brother, icons of excellence in India. He's coming in, he's just recently taken over. And again, like Dr. Geeta Gopinath or someone like a Rishi Sunak, symbols of what India can do. The Prime Minister really likes Ajay Banga. And there's several occasions where for important international assignments, he's used the services of Ajay Banga. And Ajay Banga too, big admirer of the Prime Minister as well.
And Shiv and Ajay Banga have something in common. Both are from Stephens. So he's a Stephanian, he's IM Ahmedabad, he's been someone who's a product of the great Indian success story, CEO of MasterCard before he went to the World Bank, and reflects the rise in a way of the Indian corporate technocrat or corporate leadership that India has across the world.
These are the best values of India: hard work, self-made, super bright at the international level, And he's really a very big Indian success story. To
Absolutely.
help the World Bank at this time is a massive achievement.
Shiv, it's
This
time
is
that St. Stephen celebrated the Ajay Bangas of the world as well.
He's been on TV the world over for a very long time, chief of the World Health Organization. Also the fact, Shiv, that there were lots of questions about how he was seen as being pro-China initially. But he's had a tough role to play.
He had a pretty thankless job. I think the world was right in criticizing him for his
Director General
role in defending
of the
China.
World Health
But we also
Organization.
have to acknowledge, Rahul, that Tedros Adhanom, the chief of the World Health Organization, did have to finally come around to acknowledging India's amazing role, especially in the latter half of the COVID pandemic, the end of 2021-22. Where he had many good things to say about India and had to really temper the things he had to say about China. But I agree with you. This was a tough role to be in and at a time of, a historic medical emergency for the world. So here he is, visibly aged and at the G20.
No one's had a more difficult role, really, among multilateral organizations in the last few years than he has. And thereby, I think the WHO really was on test. There's been a lot of criticism of WHO's leadership at times. But the worst seems to be over. And, Dr. Tedros is an Egyptian, representing in a way the fact that the WHO also is less of a sort of West-centric body than ever before. A lot of his deputy director generals are all people from the third world, or what will be seen still as the third world.
This is Matthias Common, Secretary General of the OECD, coming up to meet Prime Minister Narendra Modi next. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, led by its Secretary General Matthias Common, one of the international institutions that is a part of the G20. So you have the G20 countries, which is G19 plus the European Union, and then you have 14 international institutions that are also a part of the G20. The weather in Delhi is stunning at this moment. It's raining just a bit. It's not raining too much that there's a traffic. that the city starts crumbling, but it's just perfect weather at this moment.
Absolutely. And
there's rain forecast for later, though, like last night when President Biden landed.
Her Excellency Ms. Nozi Okonjo-Iweala, Director General of the World Trade Organization.
And the World Trade Organization is clearly in the spotlight, because there has been a belief that the World Trade Organization is going to face many of the challenges now in the post-COVID world. We've seen an inability to reach agreements on critical issues of trade. China, in particular, under the scanner for its role in this regard. So I think, and the wonderful thing is you've got women in a lot of these leadership positions today, which also represents how the world is changing.
Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, Director General of the World Trade Organization.
Osomani, President of Comoros and Chairperson of the African Union.
It's a big moment for Azali Assoumani, because if the African Union does become a permanent member of the G20, it would have happened on his presidency. So that's something that then gets etched in history with him, and you can see the warmth, warmth of the embrace, and the warmth of that handshake. Was that shift just the first jappi or mini jappi?
That looked like a half jappi, but that's pretty much all I think can happen. That could very well be a headline picture if things go the way India wants them to go as far as the African Union is concerned, Rahul. The first Kodak moment for today, and the first jappi, as a matter of fact, in front of the Konark wheel. So the dignitaries are continuing to arrive now. This is the leader of Oman who's just walked in to be welcomed by the Prime Minister.
His Highness Syed Asad bin Tariq Al Said, Deputy Prime Minister of Oman.
Oman is one of the invitees from India. Every host country can have some invitees. So the nation of Oman is one of the countries India has chosen to invite. And in fact, the countries you invite say a lot about your priorities internationally. So the fact that the Omanis have been invited is interesting as well. Asad bin Tariq bin Taimur Al Said, the Deputy Prime Minister
Sheikh
of
Hasina,
Oman. This is
Honorable
Sheikh Hasina.
Prime Minister.
So now what we're seeing is all the invitees are coming in, one after another. The countries that have been invited by India, big friend of India, Sheikh Hasina. And this G20 is also seeing the rise of Bangladesh. Remember, Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, was in Bangladesh before he came to India. And Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, will be going to Bangladesh after this. Prime Minister Modi helping resolve the Bangladesh border dispute with India with the help of Mamata Banerjee on that occasion. Sheikh Hasina. This is one of the successes India has in the neighborhood. While Pakistan and China, India has had fractured relations with. The fact that India and Bangladesh have made some progress is one of the achievements.
And she is, quite remarkably there now in power for 14 years. So she's, there are critics of her who say she's been extremely authoritarian, but she's presided over the rise of Bangladesh. And therefore, Sheikh Hasina has, in a way, gone well beyond her father's legacy. If you look at Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's legacy, Sheikh Hasina has, in a way, put her imprint, in a way, on Bangladesh's future.
President of Egypt, also someone who shares a very warm, a warm rapport with the Prime Minister. They've met a number of times. This is the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi.
And remember, Prime Minister Modi was in Egypt on his way back from the United States and showing the importance that Egypt is getting with India, and the fact that he's again one of the countries that India has chosen to invite to their G20 during the presidency. The President of Egypt being welcomed by Prime Minister Modi right in front of the stunning Konark wheels.
Mr. Mauritius Prime Minister, who's up next. Yeah, there he is. Pravin Kumar Jugnauth is the Mauritian Prime Minister. India Today scored the first interview with him. He was the first government leader who spoke to the Indian media, and obviously that was on India Today.
He spoke of his love for Hindi films, the cultural ties.
Singham is one of his favorite films, he said.
You've got a country, again, where India has a rich sort of relationship with. I mean,
His Excellency, the Honorable
you've had series of prime ministers there, all of Indian origin. And therefore those links are very, very deep. And, you can go back to Shiv Sagar Ram Ghulam, the other prime ministers from Mauritius. Each of them have had a very deep relationship with India. And obviously the Mauritius route, as it's called, has led to a lot of controversy when it comes to financial transactions. But when it comes to, just the relationship between the two countries, it's been very strong and built on ties that stretch well over a century.
Again, one of the countries that India chose to invite to the G20. Now, we're seeing the Prime Minister of Netherlands just walk in.
Mark Rutte is the Prime Minister of the Netherlands.
His Excellency, Mr. Mark Rutte, the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of the Netherlands.
Look at the flamboyance, the flair, just the walk.
Dutch warmth.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And warmth there being exchanged between the Prime Minister
and he's also been around for a long time.
Oh, big jumpy
He gets a nice jumpy.
Yeah, was sworn in 2010. So he's been around for more than a decade. Yeah. The last time he won by a majority of 1. That doesn't happen too often, but he's been around for a long time. So there's, this is another country which has seen a lot of stability within the European context. And, Netherlands is, again, a country where whose corporates are all global brands.
Next up is the Nigerian president, Bola Tinubu, who was actually the first to arrive for the G20. He came a couple of days ahead. We understand that he had some medical issues to attend to in India, which has some of the finest hospitals in the world. Medical tourism also a big thing here in India. President of Nigeria, now being welcomed by the Indian Prime Minister.
Bola Ahmed Tinubu, President of Nigeria, walking in.
His Excellency
Geopolitical red
Mr.
carpet, as
Bola
it were.
Ahmed Tinubu, President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
Nigeria really is one of the countries in Africa which has been on the move, seen as a future powerhouse, an engine of global growth in the years to come. So they're really seen as one of the bright sparks in Africa. Some very interesting developments on the business scene there. A warm namaste to the President of Nigeria. The first guest, he came in on the 5th of September.
It was very interesting. Some Indian newspapers actually had full-page ads of a state within Nigeria which had built relationships with Indian corporates, especially in the infrastructure sector. So you've got a lot of Indian companies actually who are now building large-scale highway projects in Nigeria.
His Excellency Mr. Lee Hsien Loong, Prime Minister of the Republic of Singapore.
This is the outgoing Prime Minister of Singapore, of course. There is an Indian origin Prime Minister, a Tamilian, in fact, who takes over as the new Prime Minister. Tharman Shanmugaratnam, who is the new Prime Minister. This is the outgoing Prime Minister
Lee
of
Hsien
Singapore.
Loong coming in, took office on the 12th of August 2004. Again, one of the invitees to the G20, signifying India's choices on the global scene in terms of the...
And Prime Minister Modi has had a very strong, enduring relationship with the leadership of Singapore. Even when he was Gujarat Chief Minister, it was one of the states, one of the countries with whom he had built a rapport and almost saw Lee Kuan Yew as a kind of model to emulate in terms of his commitment to growth of his country.
Her Excellency Mrs. Nadia Calvino, First Vice President of the Government of Spain and the Minister for the Economy.
This is the leader for Spain stepping in for the Prime Minister.
So the Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has COVID,
He has
which is the
COVID.
reason why he isn't coming. Am I correct?
That's correct. He contracted COVID, unfortunately, 3 days ago, and that's when it was announced that he wouldn't be able to make it. There was a bit of a scare with Joe Biden as well, as we know, with his wife contracting COVID, but he still managed to make it. He had 2 tests, one in the US and one in Germany, where he made a small stop. And thankfully, he has been able to make it. About 10:15 is when we'll see Biden arrive at the Bharat Mandapam. That was the Spanish Vice Prime Minister
Mohammed
representing
bin
Spain.
Zayed Al Nahyan, the President of the United Arab Emirates, will be the next guest, another special invitee, invited by Prime Minister Modi for the big Indian G20. He's been president since May 2022.
We often forget, in 2015, Prime Minister Modi became the first Indian Prime Minister to
Royal
visit
Highness
the UAE in
Sheikh
34
Mohammed
years.
bin
And since
Zayed
then,
Al Nahyan,
he's visited there
President of the United
almost half a
Arab
dozen
Emirates.
times. Quite remarkable, the outreach between India and the United Arab Emirates.
There's one MBS and there's MBZ, Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, President of the UAE, ruler of Abu Dhabi. Sheikh Mohammed is the third son of Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, was the first president of the UAE and ruler of Abu Dhabi. He's considered the most powerful Arab ruler, one of the most powerful people on the earth, been voted by many international magazines.
And you can see the warmth because it's been built over the last several years. I think the Prime Minister, on his return from Paris, was again in UAE on an official visit.
Again, we were discussing Saudi Arabia. This too, one of the big achievements of the Modi
government.
government.
That's right, and you've got there,
UAE away from
you've got a trade agreement in place. You've got extradition agreements in place. This is a country with which India has built, and the large Indian diaspora. I mean, you cannot miss India's outreach to the UAE without looking at how UAE has also embraced India and Indian immigrants over the years.
All the 9 invited country heads have arrived. Now, one by one, the G20 country heads will arrive. So first you had the international bodies, then you've got the invited leaders, and now one by one, the G20 country heads will start arriving at the Bharat Mandapam. It's going at a fast clip, so they're not being
So you start with the multilaterals, then you go to the 9 invitee countries, and then you have the 20 countries. I mean, you've had the African Union, you've had countries like Singapore, you've had UAE, and you've had the heads of WTO, World Bank, IMF,
ILO,
WHO, and now you get the, presumably, one by one, the 20 countries of the G20.
Her Excellency,
this is the
Ms.
Economy Minister of
Sanchez,
Mexico, Raquel
Minister
Sanchez.
of the Economy
Remember,
of
the Mexican
United
president has
Mexican
decided he will
States.
not travel, so 2018 onwards he hasn't traveled internationally. So this is the first G20 member country. Remember, Emmanuel Macron is not here, so it's G19 just at this moment. This is the Mexican Minister of Economy, and the interesting thing is data that just came out this week shows that Mexico is now the largest exporter to the US, showing how fast there is not a decoupling, but how dependence on China is coming down. China is now being overtaken by Mexico when it comes to exporting to the United States. That's the Economy Minister of Mexico. On your screen right now, Raquel Sanchez. I like how they have these intercuts with a jib and they've got tracks. Their production is quite high quality.
If you saw yesterday when Prime Minister Modi and US President met, there was a slow-mo camera which sort of had different angles. Presumably, it was a 4 to 6 camera setup because you had different angles. Again, very well packaged, and the images were perfect. As you're seeing these images, I mean, this is purely in terms of the manner in which this is being presented to the world, it's as good as it gets.
And you've got millions of people beyond Delhi. You know, when we're stuck here in Delhi, we tend to be Delhi-centric, and we think that this is happening in our backyard, so we're familiar with it. But we also have to remember that millions of people watching India today across the country right now.
No, and all these intercuts really look nice, you know. Remember, when we saw the first time when Dr. Manmohan Singh had gone the French Bastille Day celebration, you saw how they had cameras on planes, they had jibs, they had tracks. It just makes everything look stunning. Look at that Nataraj statue there, looking so glorious. It's much better to have things moving rather than just having like a blank shot waiting for the car to come in. So this is actually just a much better way of doing it.
It's also immersive, right? Because, you know, people watching from different parts of the world and the country getting to experience it first, and in this way keep it moving. All of these flags on the outside, the building itself. Remember that the Pragati Maidan, which has been upgraded into the Bharat Mandapam, is something we are familiar. People who live in the national capital are familiar with. People on the outside have very little idea about what a big deal this actually is. So every little movement, every little slow-mo camera, the packaging, as Rajdeep put it, is in my view really important because it gives citizens, viewers, stakeholders in India across the world, and I'm sure a lot of diaspora also watching this very carefully, a real immersive sense, first-hand kind of sense.
And
it's
in a
second
way,
best to a ringside view.
And Shiv, in a way, if you look at the transition of Pragati Maidan to Bharat Mandapam,
Yeah.
Pragati Maidan, 1972, 25 years of Indian independence, Indira Gandhi, whose political playbook the Prime Minister at times is seen to have borrowed from, it was on the eve of the International Trade Fair, which was called Asia 72. So from 1972, where, it was very much a very, it wasn't it wasn't a monument that you sort of visited to see its sort of architectural splendor. It was very functional. From there, you move to Bharat Mandapam, which, is a way of transition from that very basic structure that the Pragati Maidan had in 1972, which we all thought was a big deal at the time, to where we've reached today in 2023, 75 years of independence. So India at 25 versus India at 75. Look at those images and compare them to the images that you had during the Pragati Maidan.
We actually did that a few days ago.
It's a huge transition.
Yeah, and they've got very expensive plans for how the Bharat Mandapam will be used. We tried to make some bookings for some of our events, and it's quite packed out. And in fact, the ITPO is also a profit-making body, so it's not just run, as a government organization would be. It's run for profit, and Piyush Goyal was telling me that they intend to take this public, if they can, to the stock markets, and they're contemplating a listing as well.
That if Piyush Goyal does that, it again will reflect how much we've changed. From this sort of old government
His Excellency
Pragati Maidan organization, if they can open it up to the world.
Of Argentina.
This is the Argentinian President Alberto Fernandez. Had special requests. He ate food at the Imperial, went around to the Lodi Garden for a walk as well. So he and his delegation have been a bit out and about in the national capital. Won the presidential election in 2019 when he defeated the incumbent Mauricio Macri. He's been dealing with different issues in Argentina, one of the most important countries of South America, born in Buenos Aires. Alberto Fernandez has been in politics since the 1980s. Prime Minister Modi seems to be in a bit of hurry to keep it moving, so he's keeping things. Rajiv Dogra is here with us. He's jaldi karo. He doesn't want to pile up there.
It happens in most of the international meetings because the host has to hug so many.
That's Anthony Albanese, Albo, walking down the political red carpet. Big friend of India, member of the Quad, loves cricket, likes India, close friend of the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese.
And one of the transformational relationships again is India-Australia. If
Excellency,
you remember, the Prime Minister,
Mr.
when he went
Anthony
down under, was the
Albanese,
first Prime Minister in years to
Prime
go to
Minister
Australia.
of Australia.
Australia was seen as a country suffering from what one writer called the tyranny of distance. Geographically far away,
And they've been pushing back on China very hard.
Yeah, but if you look at it strategically, with Quad, commercially, you've got major Indian companies now with large investments. The Adani Group has a large investment in mining, been controversial, has led to opposition within Australia, but it is still seen as one of the major Indian investments in Australia. And now you've got other investments.
He's stopping to talk a bit to Anthony Albanese.
And they were there, if you recall, even a few months ago or earlier this year when there was an India-Australia test match in Ahmedabad. They went together. They did a sort of round of the stadium in their little buggy, which was quite interesting because one thing that unites India and
Justin Trudeau
Australia
is there. We saw how warm the embrace was for
Prime
Anthony
Minister
Albanese.
of Canada.
Let's see if it's the same now that Justin Trudeau is walking in. He came with his elder son Javier, walking down the political red carpet to meet Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So he's got a nice namaste happening. Let's see if there's a jappi as well. I doubt that very much. He's got a handshake, tap on the shoulder.
But possibly this is one of the more contentious relationships that India has in recent times. India has a lot of concerns with the way Canada is seen to have become a center for Khalistani elements, and therefore there's a concern that has Canada done enough to rein in? I presume there's a bilateral. There was scheduled to be a bilateral on
15
Sunday.
bilaterals. Now Li Xiang is going to come.
There'll be a pull aside.
There will be a pull aside
China
where this is expected to be
will
discussed.
be the next guest, and watch very carefully every minute element of the body language at play. The Premier of China stepping in for the President Xi Jinping, who didn't go to Jakarta, hasn't come to Delhi. Okay,
Ursula
before that,
von der Leyen of the EU is here.
we had an interview with the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. She's coming down right now to meet Prime Minister Modi, has been head of the European Union since July 2019, first woman to be serving in this role, responsible for the legislation impacting 450 million Europeans. She was born in Brussels. Former Defense Minister of Germany, long-time ally of
Ms. Ursula
Chancellor
von der
Angela
Leyen,
Merkel,
President
one of the
European
staunchest
Commission.
supporters of Ukraine in this unprovoked war from Russia. India and EU marking 60 years of their bilateral relationship. The EU is one of the members of the G20, so there's 19 countries, and then there is the European Union.
His Excellency Mr. Charles Michel, President of the European Council.
Charles Michel from the European Council.
Oh, he's the one who said that, is it?
He's the President of the European Council, responsible for defining the political direction and priorities of the European Union. The European Council is a part of the executive of the European Union. This is really the informal forum where EU countries talk amongst themselves. Delhi is just looking very glorious this morning. You know, you got a nice breeze that's blowing. This is Olaf Scholz, Chancellor of Germany, just coming out. I wonder what happened to the eye. Do you know, Rajiv Dogra?
And surgery. Yeah.
And surgery.
Olaf Scholz.
Reminds me of Moshe Dayan.
He does, but he again, when you look at Germany, you think of Angela
His
Merkel
Excellency,
because she was so dominant for such a long time that he is
Chancellor of
having to
Germany.
come out of her shadows. Not easy. When you succeed someone who's been around for so long, it's not easy to sort of reposition your country or yourself.
He had a jogging
as a huge
accident,
leader.
and the interesting thing is there have been lots of memes in Germany about his eye patch, and he's been making light of them. So he's been very sporty about them. He posted a picture, he picked this up while he was jogging over the weekend,
Yeah.
and that's where he got this pirate-style
But it's
eye patch.
But it's an important country.
I think that's the most natural question to ask. Modi's also asking him, "Bhai, yahan theek hai?"
How's your?
But it's one of the important countries in the. It's even more important in the context of what happened in Ukraine, given the fact that Germany is expected to play an important role in the new world order post-Ukraine. So, and you expect, as I said, in a post-Merkel world, what role does Mr. Schulz play in terms of building sort of Germany's global reputation?
Merkel was successful. He has not been successful so far.
Yeah, but it's too early. I mean, I think the jury is out. As I said, when you've had a leader who's been there for more than a decade in power, was seen as a very popular, charismatic chancellor, then to succeed her can never come easy. So he's at test at home, as many of these leaders are. Many of these leaders who are here are going to, in the next couple of years, like Rishi Sunak, face huge challenges at home, whether they can take forward their international image and translate it domestically, including Prime Minister Modi. This is a huge occasion today for him and will be a build-up in a way to establish himself next year in 2024 as well. We'll see, between Chandrayaan a couple of weeks ago and now G20, Prime Minister Modi has the occasion to showcase himself to a domestic audience. Let's be honest, many of these images that are playing out are not so much for the world. They're all for an Indian audience. We've seen the Prime Minister's face on all hoardings across the country of G20.
So whose face would you have seen?
No, you could have had, remember one thing, the Prime Minister has, in a way, been identified with G20. You don't talk about G20 without talking about Prime Minister Modi. There isn't a poster, a generic poster of G20. It's Prime Minister Modi equals G20, and the hope thereby is, or the Prime Minister will hope, and the BJP will hope, that that global image only translates into more advantage to him domestically. This is also for a domestic audience to say, you've got a Prime Minister who is taking India to another level on the global stage. I think that's been part of the subtext of G20.
Giorgia Meloni is the Prime Minister of Italy.
Far-right leader. She's spoken very fondly of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Recently, she met with Rishi Sunak, firebrand far-right leader, serving as the Prime Minister of Italy since October 2022.
Her Excellency,
first woman politician
Miss
to
Giorgia
hold the premiership of
Meloni,
Italy. She replaced
Prime
Mario
Minister
Draghi, the
of
academic
Italy.
economist who was Prime Minister before her. She was in charge of the youth portfolio in the government of Prime Minister Berlusconi. She co-founded the Brothers of Italy party, which she has led since 2014.
And Mr. Modi will have a special affection for her.
Absolutely.
Because if
And
you
vice
remember,
versa.
she said that the Prime Minister is the most loved leader in the world. I mean, you know, that's the kind of compliment, and I'm sure Mr. Modi will remember. So she'll have a particularly warm place in Mr. Modi's heart. Given that that's one of the first public statements that she made, I think it was on the sidelines
You can
of a
see that
dialogue
warmth in those pictures.
of the Raisina dialogue that she'd come to earlier
When
this
she
year.
came here on a visit.
She'd come here on a visit, and she said he's the most loved leader in the world. So she's
There's a right-
warmed her way into
but
Mr. Modi's heart.
But Prime Minister Modi is an icon for the global right, and in that sense, she's a far-right leader, and therefore, looking up to Prime Minister Modi is quite natural.
Absolutely.
And she rose up after a long struggle in her early life.
This is Fumio Kishida, the Prime Minister of Japan, host of the G7 summit. That's when Prime Minister Modi had gone over there. Has been Prime Minister of Japan since
His
October
Excellency,
21.
Mr. Fumio Kishida, Prime Minister of Japan.
When you
Was
think
in
of-
India in March 2023 for the Japan-India summit meeting with Prime Minister Modi, one of the biggest backers of India. In fact, the G20 summit took place in Osaka in 2019, where there was a big discussion around exploitation of the internet for terrorism. Again, the warmth of the relations between India and Japan, you can almost feel it. Prime Minister Modi's body language just conveys how happy he is.
This is a country, this is again one of those countries which goes back to Prime Minister Modi when he was Gujarat Chief Minister. You know, this was a period when the Prime Minister, among the countries that reached out to him actively, was Japan. You know, the Prime Minister made it a point when Mr. Abe passed away to be there.
No, but that's been going on since the time he was Chief
No,
Minister.
that's what I said. 20 years. Since Mr. Modi as Chief Minister, if there's a country that you would say was among the first, in fact, if I'm not mistaken, when he became Prime Minister, Prime Minister Modi in 2014, the two countries he first visited, I think, were Nepal here in the neighborhood and Japan. Japan was the first country outside the neighborhood that the Prime Minister had gone. So with Japan, we've had a very strong relationship, but Prime Minister Modi in particular has had a very strong relationship with the Japanese.
This is the South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol, just coming out at this moment. Another great friend of India, Prime Minister Modi, working very hard on that
His
relationship
Excellency
with
Mr.
South
Yoon
Korea.
Suk Yeol, President of the Republic of Korea.
Yoon took office in 2022 as the 8th elected president of Korea since Korea became a full democracy in 1987. In 2020, India, South Korea signed the roadmap for defense industries cooperation. The 5th G20 summit was held in 2010 in Seoul in South Korea. And at that time, the focus was the development consensus for shared growth. The president of South Korea, again, South Korea, Japan, very important partners along with Indonesia in taking on the rise of China and combating the rise of China. Very, very critical role. And they were, for a long time, ambivalent or, hoping for China's rise to be beneficial to them as well. Now they see the threats posed by a resurgent China.
And you saw a bit of a reflection of that when the Prime Minister was in Indonesia just a couple of days ago. The kind of statements that emanated from both sides suggest that, India does see a big future in its Look East policy and believes that there will be huge benefits to be had by building in a way these strong relationships with countries like Korea, with countries like Indonesia, with countries like Japan, and using those relationships to try and spread their influence across the world. And I think that is a huge challenge for the Prime Minister to ensure that that Look East policy is further intensified in the years ahead.
Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa, coming up now, elected president in 2018, re-elected in 2022, used to be a leading trade unionist, became a symbol of
His
black
Excellency,
capitalism in South Africa
Mr.
after the
Cyril
ANC came to
Ramaphosa,
power in 1994.
President of the Republic of South Africa.
India has about 1 million people of Indian origin, constituting about 3% of South Africa's population. South Africa is the only country at the moment from Africa which is a member of the G20. And remember, South Africa will host the G20 in 2025.
I met him in the early 90s. He's quite a remarkable figure because these were the people, a constellation of leaders who emerged in and around Nelson Mandela in the 90s. Now, while Mr. Mandela was, the father figure, it was the likes of Cyril Ramaphosa, who was the chief negotiator during the negotiations that ended apartheid. He got his due much later. Many believe he could have well succeeded Nelson Mandela right away. But look, South Africa, again, a country much like Mauritius, with a large Indian, with that substantial section of an Indian origin population, which is which means that your relationships are built on decades of trade, of being part of, let's say, India's sphere of influence. I mean, from Mahatma Gandhi's time down to where we are today, India is one of the countries where, which will always have a special place in South African hearts, and South Africa will always have a special place in Indian hearts. I mean, India played a huge role in ending apartheid by being one of the countries that pushed the world to isolate the whites-only South Africa.
The president of Turkey, freshly re-elected, won a tough, bruising election. Recep Tayyip Erdogan coming in. India and Turkey have had their differences on various issues. But here he is, Ambassador Dogra, the president of Turkey, just coming in. He took office again in June 2023, was Prime Minister in 2003, elected president in 2014.
President
seen as
of the Republic of Turkey.
Giant in Turkish politics.
No, but he's a contentious figure. Particularly his sort of familiarity with Vladimir Putin. Also the fact that he is seen by many. I know an economist writer who told me he's the closest leader he's seen to Prime Minister Modi. In many ways, in his style of functioning, in the way he is,
no,
in
but
the way
there's a lot of corruption there. In the manner, he's got his whole family in government, his son-in-law. But there are very big differences.
But look at the dominance that he's also now exercising.
He's trying to build a new Turkey.
He's seen as he's seen as a contentious figure. Depends on, his supporters believe that he's building a new Turkey. His critics believe that he's an autocrat who's crushing all opposition, all dissent.
And there was a coup attempt against him in 2016, which he survived.
And he's in a country which is in financial crisis.
Which he just survived.
Oh, there he is, Rishi Sunak, Prime Minister, Great Britain, walking down the political G20 red carpet.
Prime Minister
coming in with a blue tie, a black suit, coming in to meet Prime Minister Modi. You see him and you get this very warm feeling of someone who's, he's not really one of ours, but you get that feeling when you see him and Akshita walking around New Delhi.
We've
discussed. Rahul, what a contrast between him. He's always cheerful. And between him
that's the warmest
and
Jappi we've seen. 3 taps on the back. Warm Jappi for Rishi Sunak.
And presumably, he is possibly the youngest leader who's there in that room today, because he's 43. I don't know if anyone else is younger. But it's quite remarkable that at 43,
Probably Meloni.
maybe Meloni, but
That's
I think
look at that.
early 40s.
That's the longest conversation anyone's had. He's almost doing like a mini lat on the
His
side there
Excellency,
with Prime Minister
Sergei
Modi.
Lavrov,
They're
Minister
still
of
going
Foreign
on. He's
Affairs
wishing him all the best in walking
Russian
out.
Federation.
Prime Minister Modi particularly happy to see him. Here's the longest serving Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov. He's had this post since 2004. In 2020, he was reappointed as Foreign Minister. He's seen as President Putin. He just
he had a
almost
stumble.
stripped Prime Minister Modi going forward. Russia for the longest time being a very close, dear friend of India.
And I think, again, the manner in which the Prime Ministers negotiated that delicate balance between Russia and Ukraine will be seen as a huge achievement, because you've retained India's sort of relationship of friendship with the Russians, but at the same time ensured that you've kept a certain distance.
And Prime Minister Modi understands the importance of Russia. I mean, despite the war between Ukraine and Russia and the position that Europe would want India to take, Prime Minister Modi understands that Russia has actually been India's most dependable partner for several decades, and therefore wanting to keep that association going. Far less reliable now as a supplier of defense weapons and systems, not being able to deliver on some of the past commitments. But that being said, Prime Minister Modi sees the importance of the ties between Russia and India and wanting to keep that going regardless of Western pressure, and being able to walk this fine balance as well, despite all the pressure.
Small disappointment that that Vladimir Putin hasn't come, or was that expected?
That was expected.
Since he didn't go. But, you know, given India, what Rahul just said, given India's special relationship.
But there was no way he was
if there
coming.
was
But
one
this has nothing
country
to do
that he
with
could have
India.
come.
But this has nothing to do with
But if
India.
there was one country he
He'll
could have
to
come to,
meet
was
Joe
India.
Biden. No, but he'll have to meet Joe Biden over there.
meets
He'll have to
him.
meet the others.
I mean, if there was one country where you've got to do it, it's in India. Given the special relationship
No, but
between
there's a
India.
war going on. I think that's like, setting yourself up for failure, having a very high and unrealistic expectation and then saying nahi hua. To expect President
But
Putin
I think
to come
India
in the
was
middle
hopeful.
of these.
I've told India was hopeful that if there was one country that, that Putin would come to, it was here.
Rajdeep, I've handled Russia relations for a long time, and Putin really liked being here in India during annual summits. In fact, he made it a point to stay for 3 days, 1 day in Delhi, 2 days in Bangalore, Bombay or something. But this was not expected at all, especially after the South Africa miss. The second thing is, this is not the only time when Putin has been isolated. You remember the G20 summit in Australia? Obama made sure that he was snubbed by everyone. So he left.
Putin
he left
comes out
after one.
stronger. Remember,
You are
even what we
absolutely-
saw with Prigozhin. Prigozhin's gone. Putin's still here. He's now there's a big fight over who gets to run the Wagner group. Will it be one of the mercenaries who are with Prigozhin, or will it be his son? So that fight playing itself out in Russia, but Putin's very much there. So is the Russian state, and that continues. And therefore, Prime Minister Modi acknowledging and realizing fully the role of India's relationship with Russia, regardless of any European conception of what it really should be.
That is why they say your sovereign interests are permanent. And Putin is one of the shrewdest leaders going around in the world today. Though coming back to the Australia summit,
Yes.
Prime Minister Abe of Japan, he gave an interview just before his death, where he said the wisest leader I have seen is Putin, who single-handedly confronted all the others, including Obama, and had the better of them. So I think it will be a mistake.
But post-Ukraine, he remains this sort of enigmatic personality. His role will, how will history judge him? The jury is out on that, and the next few years will decide that. I mean, will he be seen as someone who sort of isolated Russia in the world, or will he be seen as someone who's taken Russia back into what he would like to see Russia's due place in the world order? So he would have been interesting to have, purely in terms of body language, just there, the Biden possible interaction with Putin. We won't see any of that, but it would have been interesting.
Interesting but sad in a way, because you don't push any leader into a corner, because the history would be a very, very
Seeing the
harsh judge.
Indonesian president come in just now, Joko Widodo, also known as Joko V.
His Excellency,
has been
Mr.
serving as
Joko
President
Widodo,
of Indonesia since
President of
2014, comes from
Indonesia.
a humble background. in contrast to some of the other leaders of his country of late who came from a political or military elite. Born in 1961 in Solo, in the center of Java, Widodo is the son of a wood seller.
And you know, in many of these countries, if you look at it, and you could pick pictures from the 1950s, Suharto with Jawaharlal Nehru, they were all individuals who had built their careers through their freedom movements of their respective countries. These are all post-independent, post their independence. These are the new generation leaders, whether it's Prime Minister Modi, the first Prime Minister born post-1947, or indeed someone like Joko Widodo, not part of the old Indonesian elites.
And he's also the chair of the ASEAN, which is why Prime Minister Modi was in Jakarta for the ASEAN summit. And some similarities there, son of someone who sold tea at a railway station. Here's the son of a woodcutter rising to be president of Indonesia. That's quite a story there, Shiv.
Incredible. And I think the body language between the Indian Prime Minister and the Indonesian leader was visible a couple of days ago at the ASEAN summit in Jakarta. So the Prime Minister and he will be meeting for the second time in 72 hours, which is incredible. Very, very important relationship. India takes it extremely seriously as far as the ASEAN is concerned, and that's been demonstrated in many of the Prime Minister's visits as well as on multilateral fora. So what's happening with Indonesia also, Rahul, as far as the military is concerned, India's relationship with Vietnam, Indonesia, the Philippines, vis-a-vis China has been extremely important. Much has been achieved over the last couple of years, not just under the aegis of the Malabar exercises, but also otherwise in terms of joint patrolling in the Indian Ocean region, the Malacca Strait, the South China Sea. These countries are playing a huge role, and let's also not forget that these are countries that are buying Indian military equipment for the first time. The Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia could be next. Big ticket defense deals.
Oh, that's the president
Brazilian
of Brazil. In fact, he will be the one who will be hosting the G20 next. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, president of Brazil, 39th president of Brazil, sworn in January 2023. After being the 35th president from 2003 to 2010, he gained international praise for engaging with the world through Brazil's foreign policy. And also with left-wing leaders in the pink tide era returned. He was released from prison in 2019 after his convictions were overturned by the Supreme Court.
And you know, if you think that the world order has people only of one ideological,
he's looking around.
You know,
bhai, isko next humne hi karna hai, dekh lo kya karna hai. He's having a full look around.
But the fascinating thing about Lula is that in a world where ideology,
His Excellency Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva,
the rise of sort of right-wing politics, Lula is a remnant of the old order in a way. Started his life as a trade union worker, came through the trade union agitation, went through the ups and downs of politics, was imprisoned.
And to beat Bolsonaro.
And then defeated Bolsonaro in an extremely
left versus right fight.
In an extremely contentious election.
Look at that Jappi, warm Jappi there. 3 taps on the shoulder. He's going to host the G20 next.
And every time you see a Brazilian president, from an Indian perspective, and given my sort of small links with Goa, you think of you see Portugal there, you see Brazil and India. The links between these countries are very strong. I mean, Brazil has been very much, again, part of India's sphere of influence. Football, of course, is the great Brazilian export to the world. But Lula, I think, is a reminder that, in this world order, while they're sitting around a table, you have, as you rightly said, a woodcutter's son. You have in Prime Minister Modi the son of someone who sold tea. You have in Lula a trade union worker most of his life. You'll have Joe Biden, who on the other hand, represents some would say the best of American capitalism. And you will have Rishi Sunak of Indian origin, who's a self-made politician who's come, transformed in a way the image of what a British Prime Minister would have looked like to Indian audiences. So I think you've got a wonderful eclectic collection of people around that table. I mean, it would be fascinating to just be a fly on the wall and not just see their body language, but listen to the kind of conversations they have with each other.
Well, in a way, this is a new world taking shape.
That's right, it is.
The Premier of China.
The big one.
Watch out for the body language now.
His
as
Excellency,
we see how
Mr.
the
Li
Chinese
Qiang,
Premier is actually welcomed by Prime Minister Modi.
He's got a pleasant smile on his face as he's walking in.
And he's a very trusted aide of the Chinese president, and he's no political lightweight. You know, make no mistake, while of course Xi Jinping has concentrated political power, Li Xiang has his own position.
And he is, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the sort of economic sort of brain in China at the moment that he drives the sort of...
No, but he ran into trouble in Shanghai when he ran COVID policy. There are a lot of the lockdowns, the manner that they happened. So no jappi there, with good reason. You know, no jappi to China with good reason. Just a formal handshake, some pleasantries exchanged.
But he's been seen as the sort of driver of reform, liberalization.
The body language there very revealing. Dur se, not wanting to get.
You should have had Gaurav Sawant at the moment. You could have had.
No, but all smiles.
Yeah, go ahead.
All smiles, a firm handshake. All smiles, little bit of distance. Obviously, no jappi possible over there. But I think there was some.
I mean, you can't not. He's come here.
There was cordiality.
You don't need to be over-friendly.
There was, you know, just enough cordiality there. Remember, the fact that Xi Jinping hasn't come has been a dominant talking point in the run-up to what's happening today. It continues to be one today, by the way. If anyone has seen the Global Times headlines, they're still sniping from Beijing.
Is that, Mr. Dogra, the big disappointment? That the fact that the Chinese president is not here?
Well, in a way, I think it is good that he's not here because his scowling presence would have soured the atmosphere.
Correct.
Just now, it is, you know, as
you think it would have taken a lot of the attention also away perhaps from the other positives that are coming out of the summit? We would have been excessively focusing on Xi and Modi instead of, you know, some of the real achievements like...
Well. You know, Li Xiang used to be the Communist Party chief of Shanghai, has been in the Communist Party since 1983 at the age of 24 when he came in. He rose to party secretary in Wenzhou by the time he was 43. Ran into criticism, as I said, during the COVID in the manner in which Shanghai handled its COVID lockdowns. But he's been Xi's de facto chief of staff between 2004 and 2020. And he's had a very important role to play. And even when he was in Jakarta, seen as somebody who carries substantial weight in China, even though Xi Jinping is supreme, here is a man who has the president's trust.
But that role of China will be critical in the next 24 hours, right? Because between China and Russia, the role they take will decide how effective the Delhi Declaration is. Am I correct, broadly?
Absolutely. Because if there's no declaration, that means China and Russia have had their way. If there is a declaration, China and Russia
But from what we are hearing from sources in the Ministry of External Affairs, China hasn't been unreasonable in their pushing forth their perspective. But in the last 48 hours, from what I pick up from sources in government, they don't think China has been unreasonable. And at this moment, Amitabh Kant, the Sherpa of the G20, quite confident that there will be a Delhi declaration which is very substantive, not just in form but in substance, a very substantive Delhi declaration expected tomorrow.
Because there have been mixed signals. Shiv just mentioned the kind of sort of statements coming through the Global Times. You know, with China, you never know.
That's a tabloid. That's a pro-government tabloid.
Yeah, but that's what I said. With China, you never know. They're inscrutable. So you do not know what they will do next.
No, but they want to be a player on the multilateral forum.
They do, but they would also, I think, like, they do not want, let's be honest, they do not want India to have the sense of having credit of conducting a successful G20 summit.
The difference is that a lot of what India is pushing is the voice of the global south, a narrative for developing countries, and therefore China can't, beyond a point, on issues like the African Union, on issues of climate finance, sustainable development goals, be seen as being too much of an obstructionist.
No, that said, I think the Chinese are very clear. They do not want to cede space to India on the global high table. Now, how they navigate that while not isolating themselves, I think is the challenge. So I think the one country whose role will be critical in the next 24 hours will be China. Either the success and otherwise of G20 will depend to what extent does China ensure that it does not act as an obstructionist. The US was very clear. I mean, in that statement that was made by US officials, it's up to China to decide. What role does China want to play? So I think the world is with India on this.
That was Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, who said China could play the role of an obstructionist if it wanted. So far, that hasn't seemed to be the case. Also, the amount of commentary that's happening in journals like Foreign Policy and elsewhere about the now seeming inevitability of a Chinese attack on Taiwan. 2027 being seen by several American generals and admirals, Shiv, as the potential window by when they see that happen. So it was earlier in the realm of possibility. Now it is being spoken of increasingly in international strategic circles with more certainty.
Absolutely. Most certainly something to look out for very closely. We're told that President Biden is going to be arriving very, very shortly. At about 10:35, Rahul, is when the President of the United States will be arriving. So we're going to be looking out for that image. We've just got a flash that he's on his way and will be there. The US President also has quite a busy day today. Apart from what's happening at the G20 summit itself, he will be addressing other groupings as well. There will be a photo opportunity. And of course, that big presidential dinner to round off today's proceedings.
So we haven't seen Mohammed bin Salman so far. We haven't seen Joe Biden. I was just looking at
I think there are
who all
5 or 6 left.
So and remember, once this gets over at 10:30 is when session 1 with the theme One Earth will start. So that goes on from 10:30 till 1:30, and then there is a lunch in the Leaders' Lounge. Yeah, so basically from my list, we have Joe Biden, who's still left. He hasn't come yet. The Saudi prince hasn't come yet. Emmanuel Macron will, of course, come later. So he's not here yet.
Just a couple left, right?
Yeah. And also, the Saudi prince just came. So I suppose just in the amount of time required. And he's also the Saudi
So
prince.
why does America come last? Because of you? Was it in alphabetical order that we've gone? Or is it just in terms of importance of a country?
Ambassador Dogra will probably be able to answer that.
There's been a debate. Is that alphabetical order that they're supposed to come in so no one's egos are hurt? Or do you just come in terms of size and influence?
No. Sometimes it also depends on when
what
they
time you arrive.
When they
Okay.
arrive. So on this
But you
one,
said Americans were supposed to come at 10:30.
No, because
so they were
I
potentially the
saw
last.
The US
statement
embassy has
from
released
the
that
US
list
embassy
of what he's
said
right.
that he'll come in. Oh, that's Joe Biden. There he is, President Joe Biden, coming to the Bharat Mandapam now on your screen right now. The 46th President of the United States, sworn in November 2020. He's got his shades on, looks like a Ray-Ban.
Yeah.
The first G20 Leaders Summit, which was on financial markets and the world economy, was in Washington, D.C. in November 2008. He's up for a tough, bruising election next year.
And there's still uncertainty, some uncertainty, although he said he's going to contest. There are those who are trying to push him to say, look, why don't you sort of vacate?
Step
One of the
aside.
problems is that Democrats don't have too many options. I mean, you've got a strange American presidential election coming up next year where you've got Donald Trump leading in the Republican contenders because the Republicans don't have too many contenders. And you've got Joe Biden as presumably the favored Democratic candidate, not for any other reason, but there aren't too many other contenders there at the moment.
No, but given what Trump had done to America, he's actually done quite well, especially in foreign affairs, in the manner in which he's marshaled America's allies in the war against Russia. He's actually, shown that America is still wanting to play a role in the international scene, unlike Trump, who wanted to recede. He's taken his shades off now. Questions have been asked about his age, his health. He's making light of him. Earlier, he used to be very prickly about those. Now, at the Foreign Correspondents'
His
Dinner, for
Excellency,
example,
Mr.
he's
Joseph
taken the
Biden,
odd pot shot at himself,
President
some
of
quips,
the United
and
States
okay
of
with
America.
having some fun.
And he's had a tough time, I mean, your first presidency, 2 years almost go in COVID, and then you've had the Ukraine war. So it's been a trial of fire. It's one thing to become the president, and then you become president for a period of 4 years through a virtual trial of fire, and America is in a better place today than it was a couple of years ago.
He just did his signature little salute to the Prime Minister right before walking up to him. Yeah.
There was a question mark whether he would observe certain COVID protocols because his wife had COVID, whether he would be, maintaining social distancing. But obviously all is well. He's tested negative more than 3 times. But they've had dinner yesterday.
Oh, he's showing him the Konark wheel. That's nice. Now, the Prime Minister obviously recognizing the significance
your
of the
Kodak
presence of the American president. He hasn't done that for anybody else, but he's explaining this Konark wheel and where it comes from. And that is quite an interesting moment there on your screen. As I said, this Konark wheel is from Orissa. It was built during the 13th century during the reign of King Narasimha Dev I. So
It's quite magnificent. If Indians haven't seen it, please go to Konark. Odisha is a beautiful state that waits to be discovered. I wish Odisha tourism did more. Naveen Patnaik is watching.
He's always watching India.
Yeah, so you've got to push, Mr. Patnaik, you've got to push it more. It's beautiful. Wherever you go in Odisha, you can see the potential to take Odisha to the next level. A bit like what I think if Amitabh Kant, as he says, is going to retire after this, one of his sort of consultancy jobs could be tourism consultant for the government of
He built
Odisha.
some nice golf courses there.
He could play golf if he wants, but the temples, the architecture, the lakes. Odisha is a beautiful state, and it's wonderful to have the Konark symbol out there, symbolizing in a way the antiquity of this great country, as well as reflecting just the beauty of what India is all
Saudi
about.
prince hasn't come so far, Mohammed bin
But that's
Salman.
because he came in late just now. So I guess he's got to change and be ready
He's
for
also the Saudi prince, right?
He is the Saudi
You can't
prince.
push him too hard.
And you're going to see a lot of him, not just in the next 24 hours, but also on the 11th.
He's got the status of a state visit,
That's right.
signifying the importance India and Prime Minister Modi attach to growing ties with Saudi Arabia, seen as a polarizing personality internationally, but beloved amongst the young of the country. There he is, Mohammed bin Salman, Prince of Saudi Arabia, on our screen right now.
Contentious figure, MBS. You mentioned the Khashoggi affair, and he was on the back foot. But he seems to have recovered to the
He's
point
much more
where,
than just that.
Yeah, I mean, he's seen as a political reformer more than any other
Cultural
previous
reformer,
leader, a cultural
allowing
reformer.
women to drive,
That's
not
right. So,
pushing for the
I think
burqa quite as
he
much.
has learned his lessons and he's changing steadily.
Sure.
But has the world fully accepted him, or there are parts of the world which are still looking at MBS with suspicion?
The world has no choice.
No, but given
The world
this-
has no choice.
Saudi Arabia has
and
the
look at
energy,
the kind of
Saudi Arabia
cities
has
that
the
they are
money.
building. Look at how they're trying to pivot to a post-fossil fuel world. Born on 31st of August 1985, it was in June 2017 that Mohammed bin Salman, the son of King Salman, was appointed as the heir and chosen.
His
to
Royal
head.
Highness
He's
Mohammed
working very
bin
hard
Salman
on a
Al
Vision
Saud,
2030, which is Saudi
and the
Arabia's
Prime Minister
vision
of the
for the
Kingdom
future.
of
He'd come to
Saudi
India in
Arabia.
February 2019 last.
And there's all this talk of possibly in the future, this is what was told to me by a cricket official, don't be surprised in the next 5 or 10 years we have an overseas version of the IPL on this luxury island that they are building in Saudi Arabia, which they're going to
They've
showcase.
taken all the footballers already.
That's right. So the Sindala Island.
Oh, look at that. Warm handshake, big warm jappi to the Saudi Arabian prince. Prime Minister Modi's got his top game on. Look at that. He's also smiling very happily for the cameras. The Saudi prince and
That's
now
the final
Prime Minister
one.
Modi walking out as well. Chalo, ho gaya. Now let's get
The big photo op now, Rahul. All of the leaders. I think there's a
Is that
photo op
before or
moment
after?
now.
Is that before or after?
I think there's one before. There's one later, at least as far as the.
So the first
schedule
one,
that's
Shiv,
been
would
shared
be
with us.
indoors?
I think so.
Where
I
they
think
would
so.
have just before they start the meeting, and then you have an outdoor. Surely you'll have one before that lovely Konark magic backdrop. That would be the ideal one to have.
Let's spend a moment discussing who had what kind of a welcome. Okay, so who do you think got the warmest welcome? For me, Rishi Sunak got a really warm welcome. The Saudi prince got a warm welcome. The Chinese premier got the most frosty
Meloni
welcome.
also had a nice welcome.
Oh, of course. Meloni had a lovely welcome. Yes.
Multiple taps on the shoulder and big smiles.
Mutual admiration.
Rishi Sunak had probably
And he did a nice
the sort of
namaste.
longest conversation was there between Sunak
But he showed
and
the Konark wheel only to the American
only
president.
to the American, which is I guess where all at the end of the
Where
day
the power
dollar
is.
the dollar still matters. I mean, yes, it was. I thought he'd do that for every leader to explain to them.
But
Hopefully
taking
he'll
too
do it
much
at the
time.
end.
No, but he had,
so hopefully he'll do it at the end.
The one thing, when you meet Prime Minister Modi and interact with his officials, the one thing you realize is how particular he is about time management. I mean, obsessive, especially given the proclivity of a lot of our leaders not to mind time quite as much. His ability to keep things going. So he's his own time manager as well, keeping things moving. There he is on one part of our screen explaining the Konark wheel to American President Joe Biden, and then that namaste with Rishi Sunak. Very warm welcome to both of them. Frostiest welcome, of course, to the Chinese premier, and then to Justin Trudeau.
But not really frosty also, Rahul. I mean,
Relatively
it was compared to the rest. Yes,
It was correct to the Chinese.
Yeah.
It was proprietary.
It was formal to the Turkish, and I think the Canadian deserved to be kicked. But Mr. Modi was polite.
Okay. I mean, at the end of the day, you are host.
India playing the perfect host. Absolutely.
I mean, at the end of the day, you know, whether you have disagreements on specific issues, and there will be disagreements.
Yeah.
I mean, you cannot avoid the fact that these are your guests, you are the host, and you've gone to the world and said one family. And once you say one family, you can't say, I'm not going to,
No, India is bigger than those individual issues.
That's right. I think, and I think the Prime Minister is playing the perfect host. So I'm not going to read too much into the fact that it's frosty. I think it's just the Prime Minister being very clear.
Frosty compared to the others.
Compared to the others.
So, which is only expected. I mean, you can't do a jappi with the Turkish president given all that he's done. So I think he's being very business-like and formal and being appropriate. And also reflecting through, and Jaishankar speaks a lot about this, that every nuance of body language is an important part of foreign affairs, and it reflects the warmth of your relations with your country, and that's just the way it is. So when you meet Justin Trudeau, given all that's happened on the issue of Khalistan inside Canada, I think that element comes out. You can't keep it hidden. And a very warm namaste with Rishi Sunak, Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister, being met with very, very fondly as well. So it kind of comes through, Rajdeep.
Look, once you've called Prime Minister Modi the most loved leader in the world, you've already won him over. So the Italian Prime Minister knew the way to Mr. Modi's heart. Whenever the Prime Minister is praised in that fulsome manner, you will always see as would be with all of us. If someone sort of said something nice about me, you'd remember that, and you sort of reach out to her. Unfortunately, with Canada in particular, relations have been difficult for an extended period of time, and therefore it's only appropriate that India at some stage, bilaterally certainly, sends out a strong message to the Canadians. So
imagine, there he is, Lula da Silva, the president of Brazil, and he's constantly looking around. And I'm just thinking, in his head, he's imagining that he will have to go and do all of this next time. And he's wondering how he's going to actually make that happen. He's got Rosagena Lula da Silva, his wife. They started dating in 2018. This is when he was arrested by the federal police from their headquarters in Curitiba. It's when they got released that he went out and married her. So he is the only one who actually brought his better half along, and she kind of walks away for the photo opportunity.
Yeah, that's right. That's interesting. He is the only one. I first thought that was the translator. Am I right or wrong? You're saying that's his wife?
That's his wife.
That's his wife. Okay, that's right. So I for a moment thought translator, but look at the Brazilians.
Come on,
I wasn't sure. No, I don't know.
I don't know if anyone.
My first reaction was, has the Brazilian got a translator? Then I realized he's the only one with his wife. Where are the others?
If you remember,
are you telling me none of the others have got their spouse?
Are you telling me that the translator?
No, they have. Rishi Sunak has.
No, are you telling me? No. At the venue.
At the venue.
G20 right.
Right. Okay.
No, but surely she won't be sitting in on the at the venue.
Of course not.
No, and also she walked away, immediately, right?
Very correct.
Because of that photo. No, I'm just saying, if you, a small little anecdote, and all of us remember that when Nicolas Sarkozy, as the president of France, had visited, Carla Bruni was his girlfriend at that time and not his spouse. And if I remember correctly, at that time, the SPG, the MEA, they didn't have an existing written, laid down protocol on how to treat or what kind of courtesies to extend to a partner and not a spouse. And I think that was the point at which those rules were actually made. And now India, of course, has those rules in terms of how to extend protocol for a partner who may not be a spouse.
In fact, a polite word was first sent to France.
Yeah.
That, are you sure you're bringing her?
Yeah, exactly. So,
But on the walk by Lula and his wife,
Not the translator, sorry. I don't know why that came into mind. Is the translator come? But go ahead.
Holding hands and walking on the G20 red carpet.
Well, if you're a Brazilian and you're on Copacabana beach, you could be with your translator. But go ahead, sir.
Lula and his wife, the way they are sort of, casually strolling along, I thought they were in a carnival. Because they look so
I love that.
They're just reflecting the ethos of their country, and we could well be watched in the Brazilian embassy and by people later, so we don't want to be saying anything inappropriate, Rajdeep, just to be doubly careful.
No, in fact, the Brazilian ambassador is someone I got to know last year quite well, and great football fanatic. His big depression moment was when Brazil lost out to Croatia in the quarterfinals of the World Cup. But very much, again, someone who had embraced India, certain countries, as we mentioned, have had long relationships with India, which have sustained through, Prime Minister Modi had a strong relationship with Javier Bolsonaro. He's got a strong relationship with Lula, or is building one. These are countries, irrespective of who comes to power, in both countries, you never hear of tension. In fact, I think Brazil was one of the first countries we were going to send our vaccines to. That became contentious later. The whole idea of the